welcome to this Australian Council for Adult Literacy in 2610 webinar. For those of you who don't know, 2610 represents the 26 letters in the alphabet and 10 numbers, and brings together business community and the Tasmanian government to raise awareness and work together to improve adult literacy and numeracy in Tasmania. ACAL is excited that 2610 has named 2015 as the Year of Numeracy for Adult Literacy Practitioners and offered to co-host this webinar to allow you to share this professional development opportunity and also to show the way to other state governments. We've been overwhelmed with the number of people wanting to participate, which demonstrates the need for professional development opportunities, especially numeracy in Australia. And some of you may have heard this morning on ABC News, certainly they were talking about the NAPLAN and the need for increased numeracy skills in schools as well. But we're really pleased that Dave Tout is available to talk to you today. Just a few technicalities before I introduce Dave. We will have a Q&A time a little later, and Jen Dunbabin from 2610 will be assisting Dave with that. In the chat box, I can see that a lot of you are chatting already, so you'll also see a contact number for immediate technical assistance, which I just had to call. Please interact by using the chat box for relevant comments or questions. You'll find a small Q button where you can add a question. We'll also put up polls during the session where you click on your preferred response. The webinar is also being recorded and will be available in a few days. Dave is well known as an experienced numeracy educator. He certainly had a big influence on my teaching practice. I was one of those literacy teachers who were a reading and writing person and not a numeracy person, so I was a bit nervous about teaching maths. But I found, that I could confidently teach numeracy in a very hands-on and real-life way through Dave's workshop and other PD that it was available at the time. Dave's also developed many excellent resources used to engage learners in numeracy, and his work in the ACER has impacted very widely across Australia. Without further ado, I will hand over to Dave. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And welcome everybody. Sorry, I'm in a reasonably big room here, so and you don't want to see me anyway, so yes, so the video will be turned off soon by Hannah. So yes, thank you everybody. It looks like we've got 48 people online already, so again, I think that's an amazing response, and this is the third webinar that we've run. We've had one a week for the last 3 weeks. So thank you for persevering. I know some of you were probably kept on a waiting list. So what we want to do today is really to go through a few, I guess, reflections that I see from my experiences in working in Tasmania this year mainly, and talk about some of the things, the messages I was trying to get across, but also we've got a few people who will also share their experiences in working in the numeracy sector with us, and I thank in advance and Tina and Poonam, who will also be involved in sort of presenting to you and talking with you about some of their experiences. So first of all, we want to have a little bit of an introduction, see where people are from, and then also at the end, hopefully, we'll have some time for some discussion, and Jen will also be keeping an eye on the chat, so pose your questions there, and we'll see if we can answer those as we go through. So my first question is, and we already know we've got some people from New Zealand, so I'm not sure we've got another in here, so welcome the people from New Zealand. But if you can let us know, I'm not sure where the New Zealanders want to do, maybe you should put I think we can count that there's 3 New Zealanders, I think that was right, so Dara and the others, welcome. And if everybody else can vote away about where you're from. So, come on, we need somebody from the ACT in the Northern Territory. New South Wales, Victoria, trying to get to the lead. Jen saying maybe she's the only Tassie person. How many are we up to? Can I add up? I have to add all those up, don't I? So still we got Victoria and New South Wales head neck and neck at the moment, 12 and 12. We got 4 from Queensland. I know we had some from WA. Doesn't look like we've got anybody from ACT and Northern Territory. But I think that's a nice spread. I think there seems to be a lot of interest in numeracy at the moment, and I think, as Jenny was saying, the response both in Tasmania but also for these webinars being run jointly between 2610 and ACAL has been enormous. I think we've had interest from probably closer to 200 people than 100 people. Not everybody turns up, but today we've nearly got 50. So the next question then that I want to find out from you is, what do you see your main role being in adult language literacy and numeracy? So are you mainly a literacy person, an ESL person, a numeracy person? So what's your key role in terms of what you actually do in the sector? So we've got quite a nice spread here. I hope everybody can hear me. Please put into the chat if there's any technical issues, and there is a whiz behind the scenes at fixing everything up. So this is a really nice spread. We've got, I think it's more balanced than we've had on the previous couple of weeks. So first time ever, I think we've got most people saying they're fundamentally a numeracy teacher or tutor. I know coordinators and managers are neck and neck. So I think the other two times we've had most people have been literacy, and numeracy hasn't quite been the lead in terms of who's there. So again, welcome, which is a nice, good spread. And next question, which probably is a bit related to the previous one. How much do you feel you know about the teaching and learning of adult numeracy? A lot, a bit, not much at all. Again, quite a nice spread. We've got a few people who are saying a lot. There are a few sitting on the fence and saying, a bit, and then a few saying not much at all. So that's, probably fairly representative about how a lot of us probably feel in terms of our supposed field of expertise. All right, might move on to the next one. And the next question was, how much have you actually taught numeracy? So again, it's a lot, a bit, or not much at all. Again, a very even spread here. And again, I guess that's probably pretty representative and similar to the results that we had before. So really the impetus for this series of webinars was the fact that, as Jenny said, 2610 decided that 2015 would be the year of numeracy for adult literacy practitioners in Tasmania. And so I was down in Tassie earlier in the year, and we had a launch of the year, and I ran a workshop, and then I went back for a road trip where I travelled from Hobart to Launceston up to Burnie, and over those two series, if you like, the startup workshops and then the actual practical road trip that I went on, I think we got to about 150 different people across Tasmania, which is just, to me, staggering. And I guess one of my claims to fame is that I've been around the traps for a long time, and I've been teaching numeracy in the vet sector since the late 1970s, and I don't think I've ever had a year like 2015 where there seems to be this amazing interest in numeracy. And even back in the days when I was helping to develop and write and run adult numeracy teaching as a course in Victoria and a few other states, I don't think we ever got to so many people. So I guess to me, I've been reflecting a little bit about why there's all this interest in numeracy, and I think a lot of it stems back to the fact that some of the international surveys, the Adult Literacy and Life Skills Survey All, and PIAC, the new version of PIAC, the Program in International Assessment of Adult Competencies, has raised the profile, I think, both of literacy and numeracy, but specifically, I think, in terms of numeracy, because some of the data that's coming out in those international surveys, including also the one of 15-year-olds, the PISA survey that is conducted of 15-year-olds around Australia, And I'm the only sad individual in the world who actually knows about all of those surveys because I've worked on all three. But those surveys all show that I think Australia's performance in numeracy compared to our performance in literacy is nowhere near as good. So I think there's a lot of evidence out there now that actually shows for Australia that our performance in numeracy isn't as good as relatively as our performance in reading. I don't know what the reasons are. There's probably a lot of reasons, but I think there is now some awareness that we need to do something about the numeracy issue. And there's other research, again, that I shared when I was down in Tassie that also shows that I think numeracy can have a bigger impact in terms of both an economic sense and also a social advantage / disadvantage sense than does literacy. So I think there's other research out there that says, hang on here, we can't just always say language literacy, numeracy, and then forget about the numeracy. So I think there is a growing awareness that numeracy is an equal partner to the other L and L, and often it is forgotten, and I think there's an awareness now that we can't forget that. I think there are other sort of practical issues. I think the mandating of pre-training LLN assessments as part of being an RTO means that people are now aware that they have to assess not only literacy but also numeracy. So I think there's a bit of the issue that people are being forced to address the numeracy issue. And then this year I've been now invited to talk at a few conferences to EAL or ESL teachers, and the AMEP program and says we are now assuming also that they need to address numeracy. And maybe I hope that people are realising, like Jenny said, that maybe numeracy doesn't have to be scary or math doesn't have to be scary. It can be a bit of fun. And as Ian Chubb was talking this morning, when I was actually down in Tassie for the launch, I got invited to talk on ABC Radio, and apart from having to get up very early, instead of it being a very negative message, I think the message from my perspective and through these workshops is that numeracy is something really important, and what we need to do is move forward and address the issue, and that we can build on everybody's skills. Everybody has some knowledge, and it doesn't have to be the doom and gloom where we're always saying that 50% of Tasmanians are illiterate or innumerate. That's not the message that we want to give. It's about how we're moving forward in improving everybody's skills. So I guess to me, I think it's really interesting that this interest is a really positive message, and I think the fact that people are now saying, yes, we need to do something about the numeracy issue is really good. And I think by the end of this month, I will have visited every state and territory apart from the Northern Territory to run PD about numeracy. And although I have always got around the traps a lot, I think the interest this year has been extraordinary. And the number of people that I've been getting to sessions have been much, much higher than I would have ever expected in the past. So from my perspective as an old numeracy practitioner, it's just really rewarding to see this interest in numeracy suddenly come bubbling to the surface. So now I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about why I see numeracy as really important, and also what I guess some of the key messages for those, because it doesn't sound like anybody who attended any of the Tassie workshops are here today, apart from Jen, that, what were some of the key messages I was trying to get across, so that for people who haven't experienced them, you might get a bit of a feel for the sorts of things that I see as important. And I do collect cartoons, so you can see the cartoon on the right-hand side. And, from my perspective as a trained mathematics teacher and educator, getting the decimal point in the right place is really important. And groups like the Australian Industry Group, so industry, I think, is now much more aware that issues of numeracy or low levels of numeracy do have significant consequences in the workplace. So I see math as really important, and unfortunately I think the international surveys tell us that there's not enough people who probably do know how to put the decimal point in the right place. Now the little picture there is a photo which just sort of shows, I think, maybe how sad some of us math people are, that I can actually wander around supermarkets and take photos of price codes on the supermarket shelf. But you'll see there that this was a photo of just dishwashing powder, and you can see that the price of this dishwashing powder, according to the price code, is about 5 times as valuable as is gold. Gold's worth about $1,500 per kilogram, but this dishwashing powder at my local IGA supermarket was $7,386.55 per kilogram. So I just always assumed that price codes were sort of automated, that somebody somewhere would do these calculations automatically and enter it in and it would do it. But obviously somebody sits there and actually puts in the numbers, and in this case they definitely got the decimal point in the wrong place. So I think that there's lots of evidence out there that people do have problems with maths. I actually put this up on a maths listserv, and it's created a lot of interest, and people are now scouting supermarket shelves to find where they're making boo-boos in terms of how they've calculated the unit price. And there's another cartoon that I often use, and I think often in vet, in adult education, we often scratch our heads to say, how come I'm working with this student who has been through, possibly 12 or 13 years of school, and I'm still teaching them how to subtract or add or whatever. And I think, to me, I think we have challenges in terms of how we have taught mathematics in schools, and that I think as adult educators, we basically use our adult learning principles and almost, start from scratch and start from where the learner is and build on their skills. But we're often thinking, well, how come they haven't learnt these skills? And it is, I think, because a lot of students have sat in classes being bored stupid by the mathematics teaching, disengaged from the content and the abstractness of mathematics, and it doesn't make any meaning to them, and so they don't understand what they're being taught. They try and learn by rote, but it doesn't sink in. It goes in one ear and out the other. And I think one of our challenges in relation to teaching adult numeracy is, in fact, to make the math make sense so that they can actually understand what it is they're learning, and then they can move forward. Often what we're doing is simply sort of opening the door, unlocking the door so that they can actually move forward and learn mathematics successfully. And often that's about through understanding. The other thing that I find, I've also gotten back in the last 10 or so years and worked a lot more in secondary schools. And although I'm an old secondary school maths teacher, I'm still, I guess, pretty gobsmacked by the number of maths teachers who will try and tell me that there's no math out there in the real world. Whereas I think you can't go out into the real world and not see mathematics. But I think the lens that you have on the how you're viewing the world it can change your opinion. And to me, there's maths in everything we do, in sport, in driving cars, in drink driving, buying cars. We often think of shopping in supermarkets, but downloading music, buying things online. There is absolutely a huge amount of maths out in the world. And if you get onto medication and dosages, you'll find that the mathematics is really important and crucial and can actually impact on people's lives. So to me, when I talk about numeracy, to me that's about unpacking, if you like, the math that's embedded in the real context and teaching the math that comes out of the real context as the starting point. So, when I run PD, what messages, I guess, am I trying to give? And in some ways, this, I think, slide sort of underpins, I guess, what I try and alert teachers to. And also part of it is about saying to people who aren't maths trained or numeracy trained to say there are important roles that you can play in the teaching and learning of numeracy. And I guess, to me, I see numeracy teaching as requiring skills not only in the maths, because often what we think of is numeracy equals low-level mathematics, so therefore we only worry about the fact that can they add up, subtract, multiply and divide. But to me, actually solving a numeracy problem is also about the ability to understand the problem, to extract the maths out of the problem, to understand the text, the context, the stimulus. There's a lot of reading goes on, there's a lot of listening, and then there's a lot of documenting what you're doing, so there's a lot of literacy in terms of writing up responses. Certainly you do have to do the math, so I'm not denying that part of it isn't teaching the mathematics per se. And the third aspect, which I don't think I was aware of as a maths teacher, but I became aware of by working with numeracy learners, was that the actual language of mathematics is really, really important as well, and I spend a fair bit of time dealing with that. Now just let me unpack some of those 3 points of teaching numeracy a little bit. I mean, obviously I'm just going over this very quickly, but you know, in the actual longer workshops, we actually would then do some activities that actually address some of these issues. So this is an example, and Tina, who will talk later, and I worked on a project over, a well project over, can't remember, Tina, 2013-14, I think. And we looked at measurement in a range of different workplaces. This is one that I actually had collected in my in one of the earlier well projects that I worked on, and it's from producing small goods. I still actually eat roast, cold roast beef and ham and salami, even though I've now seen how it's made. But you can have a look at something like this, and you will see that basically in every stage of this standard operating procedure about how to make meat, you can see that. So in every step of that way, that there will be some mathematics involved. I'm just highlighting a few. There's about weight, there's about time, the number of slices. You need to know about the terminology, the net weight. Again, there's 7 slices. And down here, you've got the range of temperature, again, the weight, the thickness of the slice, the unit size, and how many slices make that up. So within this simple task of how you make roast beef and follow instructions, whether you're reading it or whether your colleague or your supervisor is telling you this verbally, you still got to understand all the mathematics that's embedded within it. And to me, getting that maths out and deciding what maths to do is a literacy activity, not just a maths activity. Sometimes we often think of supermarket brochures, and I guess my most common teaching material when I was a teacher were supermarket brochures, because they were very accessible. And to me, by using those sorts of materials, they're very common, and what we can do is actually try and reduce the literacy or the reading demand so that we can get more explicitly to the mathematics, in this case of the halving of prices and so on and so forth. So you can actually in your teaching try and minimize the amount of reading, but to me part of numeracy is in fact to be able to unpack the mathematics out of the context, and I think that's something that we don't teach very well. And you will see, everybody, that Tina has just put up the web address where you can access these materials that we worked on. That's all available publicly. This was another example of something that Tina collected. This was from a Cabinetmaker kitchen being built, and this was the sketch that the Cabinetmaker made when they were visiting the house where they were updating the kitchen. And obviously you can imagine on the job that there's a hell of a lot of talking going on, probably between the customer and the Cabinetmaker, about what goes where and what the dimensions are, and then to designing it. And then when you go back to the office, you have to talk to the person who's using the CAD software to actually draw it up. So there will be a lot of, although it looks very mathematical, there'll be a hell of a lot of communication that's going on in transferring what the customer wants from the existing kitchen to what the new kitchen is. And as Tina said there, that of course it's only in millimetres when it's actually in a workplace. This is a bit of a terrifying one, but one of the other industries that I worked in was in asphalting. And this is an example from their training materials about a calculation that they had to undertake. And you can see that there were 4 steps in this process, and this is related to when people are making roads and they are spraying the hot asphalt out of the back of the truck, and then they put the aggregate over the top, and then they put a steamroller over that to make the road. And of course, naively, before I went and worked in this industry, I assumed these guys just hopped in the truck, drove it down the road at whatever speed they liked, and then they put some aggregate over the top, and then they put the steamroller over the top. But before they hopped in that truck, this is only 4 calculations they did. There were probably another 4 or more that they had to undertake before they hopped in that truck to decide how fast they drove it down the road. That all depended on the temperature of the bitumen, the consistency of the bitumen. So this was all about making some of those decisions. It depended on how many sprayers there were across the back of the truck, how far apart the sprayers were, and also how many cars were going to drive on the road. So naively, as an observer, you might think, oh yeah, they're just doing their job and it's easy and there's no math. But when you actually look at the calculations that somebody had to do, that it was really, really difficult. And again, if you have a look here, I mean, each of these steps in mathematical terms actually involves a formula. So each of those are a formula. Now in mathematics, and what I would prefer to see as a mathematics person would be to use what we call pronumerals, you know, like the old X's and Y's, but you can always use words, letters like V for volume and B for bitumen and so on. But basically each of these steps involved application, understanding and application of a formula. And what I found in workplaces is they hate math so much that they actually avoid writing a formal looking algebra, and so they write it in words. But of course the message I'm saying here is therefore your ability, your literacy skills, your reading skills are crucial in understanding what this all means. And so I think we need to remember that numeracy, that is solving a maths problem in context, has a very, very high literacy component, and some of that will contain in examples like this the ability to understand what a formula means written in words, and that can be quite scary, as Susan just said. Again, going on to the second step about understanding the maths, again, this is an example that in my workshop I talked about in asphalting, where people had to do a calculation of 20% of the height of the asphalt. You can see again there, if you think of it from a literacy perspective, the understanding of the terminology of compacted thickness and loose thickness, the literacy demands in the workplace are really quite sophisticated, whether that be a listening task or a reading task and reading the manual. But what they had to do was a calculation of 20%. And for example, the example I used is if they measured that the compacted thickness had to be 225 millimeters, then they'd have to work out 20% of 225. And in the training materials that before I went in and rewrote them all, it showed everybody how to do that mathematics by doing 20 over 100 by 225 over 1. Whereas if I actually asked you how you would all calculate 20% of 225, you would have all told me other ways of doing it. And I imagine none of you would have probably sat there and cancelled down 20 over 100 multiplied by 225 over 1, where you would probably make a lot of arithmetical mistakes. You might have said, well, 20% is a fifth, so let's divide by 5. Or a lot of you would have said 20% is double 10%, so let's divide by 10 and double. And some of you, us math people, might have said, oh, well, I have to add that on to the final result, so I'll just multiply by 1.2. And some people might have just used their calculator. But to me, the illuminating thing was that you know, when I went in and looked at how people were being trained, nowhere was there any teaching about doing the maths in that other way, the informal way, the in the head way, on the back of a bit of paper way. They were all being taken back to what it was like in a school maths classroom. And I guess one of my messages is when we teach the M part, the maths part of numeracy, is that we need to build on the different ways that our students, our adults, have done things like that. And you simply need a conversation in the classroom. How would you work out 20%? And we can all learn from each other. So what can we do in terms of teaching the maths part? I think one of the messages is learn from each other, learn from the students. I would also argue you can have a bit of fun, and in order to practice those skills, you can play some games. Then the third part of my key message is that I think language plays a really important role. And again, people who have been to my workshops will have heard me talk about some of the, you know, the misunderstandings that happen in language when we're learning mathematics. And a common one that I talk about is the word volume, which in mathematics probably means you're going to calculate the volume of a particular shape, and a common thing is to use the formula V equals L times W times H, which gives you the volume of a rectangular prism or a box. And there was some research done in the UK where students were in fact asked to do the calculation of volume using V equals L times W times H, and students got it wrong, and the students were then interviewed after they'd been through this process. And the interviewer asked the kid, do you know what volume means? The kid said, yep. And the interviewer says, well, what is it? And the kid said, it's the knob on the TV set. Nowadays, this was back in the 1980s, nowadays it might be the knob on the TV control. But you can see that, you know, there might be a student sitting there trying to solve this problem and they don't have a clue about what the volume is in the maths classroom, what it means compared to how they use volume in their everyday lives. And similarly, words like odd, I mean, you know, I always found it surprising that all my students, a lot of my students had problems with deciding between an odd number and an even number because it was so obvious to me. But, you know, maybe people think that odd's odd like Dave's odd. And, you know, how do I know if 7's odd or not? Because I've never met odd. Until I've had a conversation with him and seen him, I don't know whether 7 is odd or even. And you don't even ever contemplate that students might be sitting in your class thinking that, what the hell is he on about? How do I know that this number is odd? So to me, language is really, really crucial. And again, it was something I was never trained in being. So I think we need to be aware of the words that we use in mathematics and addressing that explicitly with our learners. So again, if you're a literacy teacher, this is second nature to you. For us maths people, it isn't second nature. So it seems to me that what we can do about language is that we need to just have a discussion again about what the words mean, ask the students to go and research them if they don't understand what they are, and discuss as a group. And again, I think the more we can have students working together and sharing and talking, then the more they're going to come to terms with the language that we use. Again, because I've been fortunate over many years to work closely with ESL teachers and literacy teachers, I've picked up a lot of ideas from them. And I used to keep word lists, keep a glossary, play different word games like doing word farms, crosswords, close activities. And there's these amazing activities called cooperative logics, which I can't really talk about now, but if you ever come to my workshops, you will always play some cooperative logics. So hopefully quickly moving on so I can invite some of the others to talk is, you know, so what do I say as some approaches for teaching numeracy? First of all, I would say you've got to find the context that's interesting to the group of learners that you're working with, whether that context comes from a vocational context because they're actually already enrolled in a vet course, and you're hoping or assuming that therefore they want to know about maths embedded in building and construction, hairdressing, hospitality, whatever it is that they're doing. If they're general community classes, then it's about something in their lives. And we'll talk about a really fascinating approach that she used later. But it is about finding things that are of interest that I think that are out there, you know, in the public domain that you can build on. And that public domain might be in people's home lives, in their personal lives, out in the community, might be about sport or something topical that's in the news. Hands-on, I think one of the things we've often done in our maths classes and numeracy classes is assume that the math has to be out of a worksheet or out of a textbook, and I think the more we can get away from that and make it practical and hands-on, I think that's really important. Other research shows that the two things that really impact on people learning successfully, although the research is based on school kids, but that really that one of the crucial things to me, two crucial things, is to vary what we do and how we do it, and to get learners to work together. And research shows that that's the most effective way where we can have a difference. Encourage learner interaction, talk about the maths, and obviously have fun. You'll see the picture down the bottom right-hand corner of people in a row. Again, people have been to my workshops, you know, have participated in me doing things about people's heights and arm spans, but it's about actually making it relevant and personal and having a bit of fun while you're doing it. And up in the right-hand corner, again, there's a game that was in strength in numbers called multi-digit. Again, playing games, having fun with maths is a really good way of breaking down some barriers and some attitudes about maths being boring. But also as a teacher, you can observe how your learners cope and what they know and what they don't know through playing games as much as or more than giving them a test. So what I want to move on to and invite to participate is some other people who have been teaching numeracy, and Anne and Tina I know quite well, and welcome, and Poonam also put her hand up to talk about hi everybody, and so I hope that we can listen to some of the others. I'm not sure whether we've got a volunteer to go first, or do we do it in the order that I've got it on the and
sitting in freezing Waka Waka. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. In pathway courses, and pathway courses predominantly have adult learners returning to learning after a long period away from their school experiences, and they generally come with a very thumbs down view about their connection, understanding, confidence, motivation to do anything regarding numeracy, and to be able to then progress onto a vocational course of their choice. So,
hi, Anne, it's Jen here. Sorry to interrupt. People are just giving a bit of feedback that the sound is a bit hard to hear and a bit fuzzy. Don't know what we can quite do about that. Or Anna might be able to help out.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll fix that for people.
Excellent.
Yeah, you can keep going and we'll fix it.
All right. So the job of a teacher in that context is to really try and switch the learner's view of themselves with numeracy around, so that they walk away with a more thumbs up perspective about what they understand and what they can do. So one of the things that I tried in the past, I used to commence a numeracy topic from a literacy perspective, in that the theme or the context was generally a more literacy-based subject area, and then we dig and find and explore the numeracy. But what I thought I'd try this time was to flip that around and start with something that was very clearly numeracy, and then explore the language and the literacy related to that so that they could understand it, and also explore some of the concepts involved, and then explore some of the problem activities that we could do with it. So it was a flipped approach to what I was used to doing. But it also meant that I needed to hand over the actual context, or I wanted to hand over the context to the students, rather than me walking in and saying, well, this week or for the next couple of weeks we're going to focus on this context. I encourage them to go out into their world and listen for the news or conversations that had an aspect of numeracy in it, and to bring that context and those numbers to class, and we'll see what we can do with them. So it had to flip from being teacher-led to student-led, which was a bit of a risk for me as well, because I never knew what was going to come in. But I knew I also had to have a suite of resources ready, and I knew that I had to work towards achieving ACSF level 3, and I knew the requirements of numeracy in that context. So I knew where we needed to head, and I thought, I'm going to give it a go. So I encouraged them to bring in whatever they felt was interesting to them, and it could come in whatever form and with as little detail as they liked, but it needed to be something that presented from the numeracy point of view. And I was really quite amazed with what came by, and it gave quite a large opportunity to cover all of the skills really over a 6-month period for the 2 units that we were dealing with, one about numeracy and calculations and the other about measurement. And this was just from a lot of local activities, but also some national and some international, including up into space as well. So the amazing thing was that every week it almost became a challenge to see how much we could squeeze into the time, because each week students would bring something that was of interest to them. But this is just a snapshot of a range of aspects. The reason I've got a helicopter up there is because we have a hospital being built, a new hospital, and we're constantly being told details, measurement details about this hospital. But at a period of time last year, there was great excitement because they were building, excuse me, a helipad on the top, and we were all told the dimensions of this helipad that had to support the weight of the helicopter. So there's a lot of volume involved, measurement, shape. So we had wonderful time doing calculations around that. Nationally, there's been discussion about what information should be provided on food labels, so we were able to explore percentage and measurement again through that aspect. We had people, the cyclists represent, we being a smaller community, there's often a lot of fundraising, and there was a group of people who had prepared to cycle over a large distance to raise money, and so we had a lot of numeracy to explore with that. Obviously, the price of petrol, there's always somebody who brings in about the price of petrol. Last year was a year of it going down and then rapidly up again. Statistics often come up, so you get a chance there to look at ratio and percentage and fractions. And then last year we had a lot of activity in space. And what I've noticed as well is the term billions is coming up. Billions, so dealing with much larger numbers, has been increasing with the different range of topics that come. So we used to just call it numeracy in the news, and by the time the session really got underway, as the weeks passed, it was taking nearly all day as we were dealing with things. But I just tried to make sure that all the aspects that Dave has mentioned, the problem solving, the group work, the opportunity to look at the consequences of decimal points being in the wrong place, and making sure that the calculations they were doing made sense was really important. And a lot of them walked away with a thumbs up, which was satisfying.
Yeah, I mean I just think that's fantastic, because it shows that really numeracy is connected to people's lives, and it's in everybody's lives, and I think that's just a great starting point. And I can remember often these sorts of conversations would start in a class, and of course, being the good old-fashioned maths teacher, I would have prepared all of this, real work that was supposed to happen. But in essence, some of these journeys that you can start on with something that's happened in the news or somebody's brought in or into the classroom ends up being such a valuable experience and a personal experience that everybody relates to. And then you end up sort of doing all this amazing mathematics that comes out of something that, to start with, looks so common and every day, but the maths behind it is really rich.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So Thank you very much, Anne. And people have been making lots of comments, which is really good. I love the one by, I think it's Susan, oh no, Laurel, who said, oh, phone plans. Yes, I can remember in the days when I used to use phone plans, but then gave up because they become much more complicated. And I think I often look at a phone plan, and I think both in terms of a literacy aspect and a numeracy aspect, they're probably up at ACSF level 5, and you know. And they I think that in the 21st century, I think, you know, our expectations on people's literacy and numeracy skills have grown astronomically. Whereas things once were kept simple and, you know, maybe on a bit of paper, you now got to go onto a website. If you want to go and buy a new phone and look at all the plans that are available, you know, the literacy skills required are incredibly sophisticated, and there are times when I've just given up because, and presumably I'm at a reasonably high level of both literacy and numeracy. So I think the sort of activities that Anne was just describing is a really rich way of engaging our learners in the world of the importance of mathematics and how it is part of our lives, and that you can actually overcome some of those barriers and move people from the thumbs down to the thumbs up. And I think if we can do that, I think that's a great starting point. So before we run out of time, Tina, you want to have a chat about your actual workplace example, which again is absolutely fascinating.
Sure. I wanted to talk to you about an example of numeracy in the workplace in a project that I worked on at a mental health service in the community. And this was with a group of staff who were Cert 3 or Cert 4, or perhaps even higher in some cases, qualified in community services qualification. And this mental health organisation was introducing a new service delivery model which moved the staff from communicating with their clients from a parental sort of conversation around we know what's best for you to a collaborative approach, which is let's work on identifying goals together. And so the main focus of the project was literacy and oral communication skills to get that change in the communication. But there were also some forms they needed to fill out, and this is an example of one of 3 key forms they had to fill out called the compass. And in this form is used to identify 3-month goals with the clients or consumers and track those goals. So you can see in this example here we have 2 goals, one which is visit mum every 2 weeks, and then in this model of service delivery, you identify what the target goal is. So the target goal in this case is every 2 weeks, and what overachievement would look, which is more often, and what underachievement would look like, which is less often. And after 3 months of working with the consumers towards helping to support them towards their goal, the staff member comes back and works with the consumer to score their progress. And in working with this organisation, the staff had got together and approached management refusing to complete the scores on this form. They said that doing the scores would be too traumatic for the vulnerable people that they supported, might trigger relapses, which could result in hospitalisation or suicide. You know, there were very, very extreme sort of concerns associated with using this form. So I sat down with management and we had a look at the form, and we talked about, you know, the risk management approach to things, and we also identified that there are a number of different forms, not necessarily in this service I was working with, but in the different ways in which consumers interact with healthcare professionals and mental health care professionals, where they're scored quite a lot. So it wasn't as though people were not used to being scored, and that this has been identified as a risk in other areas. And I suggested to management that perhaps this was a maths anxiety problem or a problem with understanding what the scores meant. And I had a staff planning day coming up with the staff, so we spent about I asked management if I could spend about an hour in that day with the staff going through the form. So in that time with the staff, I spent some time talking about the form and what it meant. I spent some time talking about the numbers and what they meant, how to do the calculations. And I asked them to trust me for that hour to do all this without any consumers in the room, just so that we can learn how to use the form and how to do the maths, and then have a conversation about the risks and their concerns for their consumers. So just to explain this form, what you do is there's up to 3 goals, as you can see, and what you say is in these spots here, so the 8 and the 2, and if there was a third goal, what you identify there is how important the goal is, and this 8 and 2 must add up to 10, so it's a weighting. So this first goal is 8 out of 10 important, and the second goal is 2 out of 10 important. And then you ask the consumer, well, how did you do? And this consumer has said, okay, I visited my mum more often, and in this case, I reached out to my friends exactly as much as I thought I was going to. And you just say 2 times 8 is 16. 2 times 0 is 0. You add those numbers together, you multiply by 5, and you come up with this magic number 80. And the concern was that maybe if people were underperforming, so if it was less often and you got a 0 here and a 0 here, you'd end up with a 0 over here. And how are they going to cope explaining to their consumers that they got a score of 0, that this would be very disheartening to their consumers. But the point of this score here is not actually to measure progress against of the participants, of the consumers, or how well they did. The point of this score down here is to measure how well the goal setting went, because this is a strength-based approach, and in a strength-based approach you set goals, and the sweet spot for attaining goals is to attain goals 70% of the time. So you're looking, the right answer down here that you're looking for is 70. If you get a score higher than 70, then you've made the goals too easy. If you get a score less than 70, then you've made the goals too hard. And for the next 3 months' goals, you'll then adjust your goals to make them easier or harder to keep trying to hit that sweet spot of 70%. So it's a measure of not how well the consumer's done, but how well collaboratively the consumer and the staff member have set those goals. And so after spending some time with the staff explaining this, so it got demonstrated to them how to do the calculations, got them to work in groups, got them to work in small groups, then in pairs, then individually, and after an hour I said, how are you going with all this? And they said that they said they were very confident using the form, and they then no longer had any concerns about using the form with their participants, and from then on they were using the form. So you can see that the numeracy demands in terms of indicator 10, actually doing the maths are quite low, but understanding particularly what this 80 means down to them, and the estimation skills in getting this 8 and this 2, and making decisions about what these numbers should be, required a higher level of understanding in indicator 9 and particularly indicator 11.
Yeah, I mean, I just think this is, and this is what I've always found when I've walked into any workplace, really, is that it often takes me an enormous amount of time to, what I call excavate the math out of the context, that it's always embedded. And what's really important is the meaning. And I think in this case, if you just look at what the mathematical operations are there, Tina, they're really quite simple. I mean, it's adding up to 10 and, multiplying a little bit. But what's really crucial here is what those numbers mean. And it's the numbers that drive the whole system. And if you don't actually know what those numbers mean within that context, you're stuffed. And that's often, we often see, oh, well, the only math skills here are being able to, add up to 10 maybe, and then multiply by 5 and have a look at your score out of 100, and you think that's really simple. But the really important thing here is that, like you said, in terms of it in the ACSF, it's about what I call the literacy and language aspects of this task that are crucial and lead to the meaning and the understanding. And I think that's something that we often don't target in on explicitly, and it's making that explicit and what it means in the context explicit that's crucial to understanding and moving forward.
Yeah, and I can see Jen said that it feels sort of counterintuitive to me, and I think that's how the staff thought that they wanted to get 100 here, where 100 is not a good score. That's a bad score. That says that you're setting the goals too easy, and you need to be, working on setting tougher goals. And because if you hit that 70% sweet spot, then it's not because what the positive psychology research shows us is that it's not attaining goals, which gives us meaning and satisfaction in life. It's striving towards goals, and that 70% mark is the mark at which we are striving rather than just achieving goals.
Yep. So it's about 5:30, folks, so we're moving on. So Poonam, are you happy to have a chat about some of the work that you've been doing around MoneySmart and etc.?
Yeah, hi. Well, my name's Poonam and I'm from Navitas English. Like I said, we do have, I have used MoneySmart budget planner feature. Now, in our organization, we have got clients from AMEP sector as well as from C sector. And with C, as you said, numeracy is quite a major part in the ACSF indicators. Challenges that I found as a C teacher was that it was not only introducing the mathematical concepts in a context which was relevant to our clients, mainly adult clients, who had low numeracy literacy and language skills, and it was not only for those concepts but also to incorporate digital literacy, which we felt was becoming a major part in the learning process. Now, I happened to come across MoneySmart website, and well, I used it for my own self to budget for my own housing when I was planning to buy a house. And that was one feature which I felt even our student could benefit from the website as such, from the feature. So I developed this particular unit of work. Now, our clients are mainly those who have low literacy and language skills, as I said. In addition to that, to get them to navigate a website which they don't understand much, and the vocabulary in it. So with this worksheet, what I did was, I'm sorry I haven't got the worksheet over here, but I'll email it to Anna, and it could be forwarded to everyone. So it was like the initial part was where vocabulary was introduced to all the students. If anyone might have used the website, it's got categories of income and expenses. So home and utilities, insurance, financial, grocery, everything that goes into a household budget. And in those categories, there are vocabulary as what it would be. Personal and medical would be doctor's fees or something, different categories. So the first thing was getting the literacy around and getting them familiarized with the language. After that, what I had done, the worksheet that I had developed was in groups. I gave them a case study where a family was, I developed a case study of a family, husband, wife, 3 children, and they were having a particular occupation, and students in group had to calculate the income for the husband and wife who were doing part-time jobs. So based on the case study that they had to read, they had to come up with a weekly payment and also the monthly. So the students had to work out the mathematical calculations, as once a week is, salary which is paid every fortnightly is times 2, which will be the monthly payment. So after getting them to familiarize with what is required to do on the budget planner, the purpose of all this was that at the end of it, they would know the mathematical calculations, and they would be able to use the budget planner website independently and know what is required to navigate that website, to understand the vocabulary, to understand the calculations they will have to calculate in order to get a monthly or maybe annual figure. Now, one thing which I felt was this was more reading focused as calculating. Our students, not only it's not that mathematical concepts and they need more support on. But they also want language, as I do. I think so. You said sometime at the start that it's also the language goes in, that goes within mathematical concepts and numeracy. So to assist that, I just developed particular, like, we modified this worksheet, and the students had to go individually in groups and get other to the other. It was we had different categories, and each category, one group of students would look into the groceries, one group of students would look into the expenses, and then they would go to the other stations and get the mathematical expression in verbal form. So maybe Lewis earns $370 a fortnight, and 370 times 2 becomes 640 a month. That's what they had to do it vocally as such. And what I'll do is I'll be, the feedback from students was they all enjoyed it, and a few of the classes which did this worksheet, they all give me positive feedback. I'm sorry I haven't got the worksheet up now, but I'll email it to everyone. And that was the purpose of the whole thing, not only numeracy, but also digital literacy.
Yeah, so thanks, Poonam. And sorry to cut you off, but you probably need to keep an eye on the time. But yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is very much something that sort of illustrates, I think, the importance of the connection between sort of the literacy and language and the, the mathematics. And that I think for so many adult learners, this is what's crucial, I think, is that if we can actually find ways and contexts, and in this case you've got the MoneySmart website, and there's some really great stuff up on there. And I think the other thing, although you haven't sort of highlighted it, I think unlike some of the chats before about phone bills and things, is that, we expect our adults and young people to now be able to negotiate and use all of these online capabilities and tools and so on and so forth. And if you don't have good literacy skills, then those things aren't accessible. So I think if we can also build into some of the work that we're doing in the classroom is also getting them to use those sorts of, I guess, facilities and things which, as literate numerate people, we're able to engage with, although sometimes it takes me quite a while to negotiate how to use them. But, if you have literacy and numeracy problems, then you're going to go to these websites and basically throw your hands up in horror and say, my goodness, I can't cope with this, and then you walk away. Then you don't have access to all of that information. So, and as Jetta just said, sometimes students don't even have internet access at home. So I think if we can always be aware that if we can use what's out there and what's being used and what's available, I think then, we have a chance of also, and we're all in education because we actually think there are a whole range of skills that our learners need, and we're in LL&N because of that even more than a lot of other teachers. And I think if we can try and scaffold and support our learners to have access to other resources and support in the community, that's even better. So I think again, it's a great example. And if people haven't seen the MoneySmart site, please go and visit it. But if we can just go on to, some of the other questions I wanted to talk about were related to challenges and so on. But I think if people can use what we've done today, and maybe there will be an opportunity to provide feedback if you've actually got some answers to these other questions. And as Jen said, you will be able to access all these materials afterwards, and the PowerPoint and audio recording, so you'll be able to come back and have a look and reflect later, and maybe pose some more questions. But also I wanted to, and this has already been mentioned, but over the years, a really, really, really close friend and colleague, Beth Ma, and I worked on a whole pile of resources, books like Maths New Beginnings, Strength in Numbers, Numeracy on the Line. Unfortunately, all of those died and aren't available anymore. Hopefully some people have still got them in their resource collection. But VALBEC, the Victorian Adult Literacy and Basic Education Council in Victoria, had some funding to pay Beth to, in essence, rework a lot of those old famous materials and extend them. And so there's a whole pile of these resources available called Building Strength. The web link's there. A lot of it's free. Some of it now you have to become a Valbec member in order to access them, but they're absolutely fantastic. So there are resources out there. You will also get access to what I've called their Dave's list. So again, ACAL will make available my list of resources, and again, some of those are free. In Victoria, we have a certificate called VCAL, the Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning, which is a Year 11 and 12 alternative to the traditional academic pathway. And basically anything that's been developed for VCAL is eminently suitable for working with literacy and numeracy learners. And so there's quite a few resources that are now available that you can access for free, but also my list has got links to other websites and other commercial material as well. So I actually think that there are resources out there. If you are beginning, you're trying to dip your toe in the numeracy, I guess if there's any message I was trying to give while I was in Tassie was that, you know, don't be scared off by the N at the end of L and N, and like Anne did, move the N to the front, make it up front. It isn't scary. It can be fun, it can be engaging, and I think if we can build some of those bridges with our learners and say that numeracy and mathematics isn't scary, it's accessible and it's important, and if you can teach the literacy and the language alongside the mathematics, then I think we can move forward. So if anybody's got any last questions, I might hand back to Jen or to Jenny, but thank you everybody, the 50 odd of you who have persevered, and I always love doing face-to-face things because we can have more fun, but I hope today's been valuable in terms of you sort of thinking about, reflecting about how you might integrate some mathematics and numeracy teaching into your teaching.
Thank you very much, Dave. That's much appreciated. Can I just ask everybody if they can take some time now to complete a survey that will appear on your screen, and that'll assist us in planning further webinars or professional development opportunities for you. I'd like to especially thank Dave Tout for presenting, and Tina and Anne and Poonam for participating as well. Thank you. Jennifer Dunbabin and Hugh Fielding of 2610 and the Tasmanian Government for their assistance in offering this webinar. Thank you to Anna Musgrove as well, who has been the magician behind the systems and making sure that everything works well for us, and Redback and Don McDowell as well. Through their technical assistance, this webinar will be available, as you've seen in the chat, to hear again very soon, and you'll get an email just to let them know when that's happening. On behalf of ACAL and 2610, thank you all for attending. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, everybody.